So today is the fifth in our series of films of and about the 60s. We've now gone, though, from films from the 60s to films looking back at the 60s. And today's film is the Bob Dylan biography, A Complete Unknown from 2024. As you know, we originally were going to do Coming Home, but there were problems with the DVD. Now people are going to get the DVD. It makes some sense anyway to start with A Complete Unknown, which covers the period 1961 to 1965 with Bob Dylan's career, and then go on to Coming Home's depiction of the transformation of 1968. Once more, it's pretty bold of me to offer an interpretation of Bob Dylan, but here it goes. Dylan is the only folk singer rock and roll star to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. During the 60s, a time when music was the meeting place for the ideas of the young and the questioning, Dylan stood head and shoulders in influence above all other singers and poets. I'm going to start by summarizing Bob's achievements. In the early and mid 60s, music was increasingly the main instrument of a growing dissent. Dylan, as composer and above all as lyricist, created several different successive revolutions in music between 62 and 66. He expanded the folk song idiom, which had been straitjacketed by the political custodians of the 1930s and 1940s, creating a richer and more poetic language for it. He grafted literary subtleties onto the protest song. The Answers Blowin' in the Wind is the most famous. The version made by Peter, Paul, and Mary sold millions. But a song such as Only a Pawn in Their Game is a stunning achievement both poetically and politically. Inside the lines of Only a Pawn in Their Game are internal rhymes, besides the rhymes at the end. Dylan then revitalized the old folk vision by grafting beat sensibility onto it, as in Visions of Johanna. And then he all but destroyed political folk music as a contemporary music form by merging beat sensibility into rock and roll with Like a Rolling Stone. Rock and roll, which was already in the middle of a creative flowering dominated by the British and by Motown, was now transformed into the late 60s music explosion. Other Dylan firsts include the merging of country and Western music with rock and roll, the first rock and roll vinyl double album, Blonde on Blonde, the first rock and roll vinyl bootleg album, Dylan and the Band in Big Pink, and the first serious biography of a rock and roll singer. Dylan's poetic influence led the way to this music being taken seriously. I think the revolution really started with the Animals electrified version of Dylan's version of the blues version of House of the Rising Sun from June 1964, a hit that Dylan says inspired him to turn to rock and roll, which had actually always been his first love. The Byrds electrified version of Dylan's Mr. Tambourine Man a year later, June 1965, made an even bigger impact. The new, serious attitude towards youth music explains the original ABC television funding of our documentary Monterey Pop, which we talked about back in week 2. No longer focused on teen romance, but philosophical, political, and spiritual. The result is a folk rock music that remains vital even 60 years later. I love that music. I always have loved that music, but I realize that in talking about that music, it's as if you have oldsters in 1960 talking about music from 1900. I think that's really a shocking uh, distance. So in 5 years, Dylan's stance evolved from proletarian civil rights worker to beatnik anarchist angel to rock and roll hipster. In the film, we see this in his going from civil rights worker blue jeans and work shirt to hipster colorful mod shirts and ultra tight black pants and boots. His songs became more beautiful, but more obscure. Desolation Row is a folk rock masterpiece full of stunning beat lyrics, but it's no longer overtly political. Compare that with, say, Masters of War just 2 years earlier. At each stage, Dylan made himself harder to follow, I think intentionally harder to follow, and provoked the loathing of those left behind, while attracting larger audiences. And when accused of having abandoned protest songs for beat poetry, he sneered, "All my songs are protest songs." And we can try to unpack why he said that. Dylan's albums, from Freewheeling, Bring It All Back Home, Highway 61 Revisited, Blonde on Blonde, and then the Basement Tapes, these were all major cultural events. So I've given you a list in the terms and concepts of the series of hugely great songs that he wrote. So first there's the classic Dylan protest song, Blowing in the Wind, The Times They Are A-Changing, With God on Our Side, Masters of War, Percy songs, the Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll, Only a Pawn in Their Game. If that was all Dylan had ever done, it would be enough. But with A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, late 62, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, we see a change towards the stunning marriage of beat poetry with protest song. Allen Ginsberg, the great beat poet, burst into tears when in spring 1963 he first heard A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall. "Here is my successor," he declared. They later became very great friends. So then we get the beat poetry period, the period of Farewell Angelina, Mr. Tambourine Man, Lay Down Your Weary Tune, Tomorrow is a Long Time, Like a Rolling Stone, Just Like Tom Thumb's Blues, This Wheel's on Fire, culminating in the three great poetry masterpieces, Visions of Johanna, Desolation Row, and Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowland. To me, the beat period constitutes really the greatest period of Dylan's work. But I want to emphasize at this point the contribution of Dylan's producer at Columbia Records. His name is Tom Wilson. An African American graduate at Harvard, Wilson was the Columbia Records producer of the great sequence of Dylan albums, from Freewheeling through Highway 61 Revisited. Dylan himself credits Tom Wilson with creating Dylan's rock and roll sound. Of course, he also credits himself. But as an example, in late 1964, Wilson on his own created on his own initiative a rock and roll band version superimposed on Dylan's original acoustic slow version of House of the Rising Sun, and he played the tape to Dylan, and this convinced Dylan that his voice could still do rock and roll. Wilson was also the producer of Simon and Garfunkel's beat poetry hit, The Sound of Silence. He laid the tracks for the breakthrough electrified version of The Sound of Silence, again on his own without the singer's initiative, on June 15th, 1965. That was the day before he finished the final tracks for Like a Rolling Stone, the next day. Can you imagine? Wilson was enormously patient with Dylan, as you can hear on the recently released raw outtakes from 1964 to 65. "You're changing the name on the song again, Bob?" A crucial figure in the development of folk rock, Tom Wilson died of a heart attack at age 47. He's basically unknown now. Let's remember him. So Dylan's career by turns reinvigorated folk music, turned protest song mainstream with Peter, Paul, and Mary, then brought the intellectualism and social conscience of the folk singers and the beats together, and then brought it all together in rock and roll. We all know that Dylan's voice is not classically attractive, and its harshness has only gone worse with age. But about the voice, the thing is, it's enormously expressive of feelings. That was the attraction. And of course, Dylan's dazzling lyrics inspired others, inspired the Byrds, who took the original acoustic version of Mr. Tambourine Man and made it into a breakthrough folk rock and roll masterpiece. Dylan personally encouraged this. He was there in the recording studio when they made the recording. And Mr. Tambourine Man was a popular hit 5 months before Dylan himself produced the monster electric guitar hit Like a Rolling Stone. And that autumn of 1965, he then personally used his influence to encourage the first psychedelic rock and roll dance concert in San Francisco. He became the poet laureate of the counterculture. Dylan was always a musical sponge, from 17th century British ballads to Delta blues and country western. And also, actually, in his early work in Greenwich Village, he's a very funny comic. But I think what was going on here was that he turned out to be engaged in what's called a manic efflorescence, a 4-year manic efflorescence like that of Orson Welles between 1937 and 1941, which would also end, as Orson Welles's did, in collapse. During this period between 62 and 66, Dylan never stopped creating, never stopped writing music and lyrics. So we've got eyewitness who said we're driving in a car and he's sitting there scribbling on an envelope. Our film shows this in the scene where Joan Baez wakes up with Dylan in his apartment. It's during the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 62, and starts making coffee and turns around to find Dylan sitting on the bed in a manic grip, composing and singing Blowing in the Wind. I have to tell you, and this is something I'll be coming back to, that like much in A Complete Unknown, this never happened. Blowing in the Wind had in fact been composed and recorded at the studio in July 62, long before the Cuban Missile Crisis and long before his romance with Joan Baez began. But in a larger sense, again, like much of our movie, it portrays a deeper Dylan truth, his frenzied creativity in these years. I also have to say that Dylan's fabulous creativity was partially drug fueled. Don Pennebaker's documentary of Dylan's second British tour from spring 1966, it's called Eat the Document, and it was filmed just before Monterey Pop, begins with Dylan head down on a table snorting cocaine. Pennebaker also said that he saw Dylan taking a lot of amphetamines in this spring 1966 tour of the UK, and the British singer Marianne Faithfull testifies to the same. In a 1969 interview with Rolling Stone, Dylan admitted it. He said it didn't influence the content of his songs. No, not the writing of them, he says, but it did keep me up there, kept me pumping them out. So he's taking a lot of speed. Well, Dylan's never been a dependable narrator concerning his own life. For a long time in the 60s, he hid his middle class Jewish upbringing in Minnesota, complete with bar mitzvah at age 13. That's in the movie. But we're on solid ground with his use of speed. And this partly explains the mystery, that is, the enormous scale of his songwriting production in this period. But Dylan himself points to a larger mystery here. Yes, there were the drugs, but Dylan himself now attributes his enormous outpouring of music in those 5 years far more to, as he says, a magic which he was not in control of and which he can no longer summon. So he's saying he was a mystery, a complete unknown, even to himself in this period. The music and the lyrics just came pouring out, and our film shows this. In fact, it's this mystery, the refusal to explain Dylan in this period, that makes the film work. We experience him. Nothing is explained. To the folk music lovers who evolved musically with Dylan, to the connoisseurs of suddenly intelligent rock and roll like me, to the beatnik fringe of the literary community, to the hippies and teenagers, they all came to consider Dylan in this period a genius, a prophet. His post-1963 songs ceased to preach politically, stopped being, as Dylan called them, finger-pointing songs. He said, I stopped writing finger-pointing songs. They instead just register seismic human emotions, fascination, pity, confusion, exuberance, anguish, and pain. But the folk purists and the old left custodians of the politics and proletarian music of the 30s and 40s, they cried betrayal. How, and I think that Mark might want to talk about this from personal experience of this. Uh, how could a rock and roll idol be a serious artist? Dylan, in his commitment to personal freedom, and one must say it's obverse, his commitment to total isolation was the condemnness of the commitment to this was condemned. And it was claimed that he did this for money making purposes, for rock and roll. It was money making institution above all. The letters that flooded into Sing Out, the central magazine of the folk world, were vicious. It seemed Pete Seeger took the lead, trying to cut the electric power to Dylan's band at Newport in July 1965. After Newport, Seeger himself then went on to a tour of Brezhnev's Soviet Union. On the other side, Paul Nelson, the co-editor of Sing Out, was very sympathetic to the revolution Dylan was creating in rock and roll. He resigned from Sing Out in protest at the condemnations of Dylan. Nelson later became a rock and roll music reviewer for a new magazine, Rolling Stone. Nelson is exemplary of the sudden divide that Dylan created in lefty folk song culture. And serious folkies looked down on Dylan because they looked down on pop music in general. They thought of it as only simplistic songs of teenage love and angst. And it's true that in summer 1965, even the mediocre pop commercial duo Sonny and Cher were recording Bob Dylan songs. How could this not be degradation? But really, it was the reverse. With Dylan, a serious artist, became a teen idol. He was the central figure in creating a music combining the visceral excitement never heard in traditional folk singing culture with the poetry and intellectualism never previously heard in rock and roll. This rock and roll revolution had a starting point, one I've already pointed to as personal experience for me, when I first heard the British rock group The Animals' electrified version of Dylan's version of the brothel lament House of the Rising Sun in summer 1964. I know exactly where I was on Chandler Boulevard in LA when I first heard that song. It was a harbinger of a cultural change. I was amazed at the power of that song, and then a year later became Mr. Tambourine Man. And then in summer 65, Dylan himself blew things open with the 6-minute electrified social commentary like a Rolling Stone. He influenced the Beatles, who had previously been the kings of exquisite bubblegum pop. By late 65, the Beatles were producing We Can Work It Out, Plea for Peace, Nowhere Man, An Attack on Conformity, John Lennon's In My Life, a wonderful song, was a Dylan-esque beat poem, and Dylan says it was a Dylan-esque beat poem, so that he was influenced by Dylan. Early 1966 saw Good Day Sunshine and Tomorrow Never Knows, dreamy advertisements for mind-expanding drugs. Turn off your mind, relax, and drift downstream. This from the most popular pop group in world history. The legend is that Dylan had introduced them to marijuana. I'm not sure that's true, but that's the legend. Simon and Garfunkel, with Tom Wilson's help, began imitating Dylan's apocalyptic songs. The words of the prophets are written on subway walls. That's January 1966. The psychedelic lyrics of the San Francisco sound were influenced by Dylan-esque beat imagery too. The San Francisco Chronicle thus became the first mainstream newspaper with a regular rock and roll music critic. Before 1966, that would have been ridiculous. But after 1966, they have a regular person talking about the serious artistry and what is being sung. And then, after all this revolution, in summer 1966, Bob Dylan had a serious motorcycle accident. He dropped out of sight for nearly 2 years. totally. Rumors circulated that he was badly disfigured, that he was paralyzed, that he was insane, that he was dead. But it was none of these things. Dylan had, in a sense, reverted to his roots in an attempt to recharge his exhausted energy. He'd become a family man, married to a nice Jewish girl, Sarah Lowndes, with two children, more interested in attending the local Little League games than Woodstock, which actually occurred only 10 miles from where they were living. And then when Dylan started issuing records again, his music was simple, simple in tune, simple in rhyme, mostly dull in sentiment. Rock critics such as Ellen Willis sought desperately to find something sophisticated in these albums. They pointed to All Along the Watchtower. But really, for the next 5 years, it was mostly forgettable stuff. Roger McGuinn of the Byrds was appalled. Since that time, there have been, of course, many flashes of genius. Dylan's brilliant score for Sam Peckinpah's great revisionist Western, Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, a great movie with a great score. And that's where Dylan first became a professional actor for the first time. The heartbreaking album Blood on the Tracks, 1975, recording his breakup with Sarah Lowndes. The great albums Time Out of Mind, 1997, or Rough and Rowdy Ways, 2020. If you look at Time Out of Mind, which is just a super album, it's from 1997. That is 30 years after Blonde on Blonde, and also 30 years ago. And yet he is still touring. He is still touring. So he's produced 100 memorable images, but a lot of forgettable stuff too. Um, After the great beat poetry period, Dylan even came to rely on a very simple A-B rhyme scheme, and Dylan himself said he can't do what he did in 62 to 66. And I think this is why our film, A Complete Unknown, ends in 65, in July 1965 at Newport. Nevertheless, Dylan received the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2016. Some prestigious quarters argue that what Dylan does is not literature at all, since true literature, high literature, requires solitude and contemplation, not amplifiers, twanging guitars, and a huge audience. To which Dylan himself replied in a letter of acceptance to the Nobel Prize Committee. He said that Shakespeare and the Greek dramatists before him and Homer before them were primarily about performance, the immediate experience, not the study of text, though the texts are there to study. Dylan said he saw himself in that tradition, not that he was comparing himself to them, but merely that that was his tradition, the tradition of performance. So what he was saying in 2016 was that his material was meant to be heard and felt, not read and analyzed. He was always and remains hostile to any analysis of his songs. Our film, in which Dylan had direct influence, reflects this. It's not analytical. There's no analysis of why he did these things. It's just experience him doing these things. And Dylan's Nobel assertion of the primacy of performance was sincere because performance is what he does. An astounding 100 concerts around the world every year since 1990. It's called the Never Ending Tour. Even now, in his mid 80s, this is what he's doing. And every performance is subtly or hugely different from all the others. It's astounding. Oh, I want to hear him sing it's all over now, baby blue. And then I turn around and go, what the hell is that? It was just totally different. On the other hand, I think it's symptomatic of Dylan's career that Patti Smith, when appearing in Dylan's stead at the Nobel Prize ceremony, chose to sing A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, a song from late 1962, a song then, in 2016, more than a half century old. And yet she still choked up while singing it. In his first insurrectionary years, Dylan was making music that was both aesthetically magnificent and sociologically earth-shaking. The Beatles remained at the top, but Dylan was then the most important individual artist in popular music and a huge positive influence on popular music. Okay, so that's Bob. Now to discuss the film. So the film depicts Dylan's 1961 to 1965 journey from ambitious nobody to dominant cultural icon. It's great drama. And most amazing, Dylan himself read the entire script, approved it line by line, and even acted out some of the scenes in front of the director, James Mangold. His level of involvement, actually, he also contributed to the script directly. His level of involvement in the production was extraordinary. So I want to first talk about pre-production, because the great actor Tom Hanks has said making a movie is really, really, really hard. So in January 2020, James Mangold announced that he would be writing and directing a biopic about Dylan, with Timothy Chalamet cast as Dylan. Mangold was a veteran director, including an Academy Award-winning drama on the life of country singer Johnny Cash. The film's original title was Going Electric, and it would center at that time on the controversy caused by Dylan's switch from folk singing to rock and roll. But over the next months, the COVID pandemic put the project in doubt. Well, such are the hazards of filmmaking. Nevertheless, during the pandemic, Timothy Chalamet spent his time usefully learning to play the guitar and harmonica and personally researching Dylan's history. Mangold also met with Dylan many times about the film. Dylan annotated the script, added lines, and added one complete scene, and provided notes directly to Chalamet, too. Finally, in November 2022, and now we're almost 3 years later, so it's the end of 2022, Chalamet stated, well, he's still preparing for the film. The project regains momentum after being stalled by COVID. The film was now retitled A Complete Unknown, and in spring 2023, Mangold began real pre-production. Monica Barbaro was hired to play Joan Baez, and Elle Fanning to play Sylvie Russo, a character based on Dylan's real girlfriend, Susie Rodolo. Mangold also announced that Benedict Cumberbatch would play Pete Seeger. Well, that would have been interesting, but a complete unknown's delays led Cumberbatch to leave for a different production. And so in January 2024, so we're now already, again, 9 months into pre-production, the veteran actor Ed Norton replaced him, and both Monica Barbara and Edward Norton would later be nominated for Academy Awards for their role. So principal photography was supposed to start in August 2023, but then there was another obstacle, a long and bitter screenwriters' strike, which delayed the start of actual filming until March 2024. That is 8 months behind schedule and literally 4 years since the original announcement of the project. It's amazing that they kept at it. Once principal photography began, things went fast and were completed by June 2024. Ed Norton says that during the 3 months of principal photography, Timothy Chalamet was relentless in staying in his role as Dylan. He didn't have contact with friends or visitors. He stopped using his cell phone so as not to be distracted. Mangold often referred to Chalamet as Bob on the set, and he was listed as Bob Dylan on the set's call sheet. Chalamet sang 40 Dylan songs in the film. He actually plays the guitar and harmonica himself. The recordings were also done with period-appropriate microphones and instruments and no modern technology. Despite the push for authenticity, despite Bob Dylan's personal supervision of the script. There are nevertheless a tremendous number of moments in the film where the narrative is false. We're shown things that didn't happen. Well, the film is not a documentary, it's a fictional dramatization, founded, yes, on real events, but as fiction, subject to dramatic manipulation. As Dylan said of Timothy Chalamet, quote, Timmy is a brilliant actor, so I'm sure he'll be completely believable as me, or a younger me, or some other me. Here are some of the movie scenes that never happened in real life. Dylan arrives in New York totally alone, a lonely, waifish figure. No, he actually was accompanied by a good friend who's been erased. The folk singer Dave Van Ronk tells Dylan that Woody Guthrie is in a psychiatric hospital. No, Dave Van Ronk didn't know Dylan at that point, and Woody Guthrie wasn't in a bleak hospital when Dylan first met him, but at the comfy home of a friend. Dylan visits Guthrie's bed in the grim hospital, no, and finds Pete Seeger there, also no. In the film, Seeger is played brilliantly by Ed Norton, but Pete Seeger wasn't present when Dylan first met Woody Guthrie. At the hospital, no, Dylan impresses an incapacitated Woody Guthrie as well as Pete Seeger with his ode, Song to Woody. Well, in reality, that song wasn't written yet. Pete Seeger then gives Dylan a lift home from the hospital and invites him to crash at Seeger's home in the Hudson Valley for the night. No, that never happened either. Dylan never stayed at Seeger's home. And folks, that's just the first 5 minutes of the film. But again, there are deeper truths that are being depicted. Dylan did arrive in Greenwich Village at age 19. So young and so waif looking that the owner of Gertie's Folk City, the mecca for folk singers, made Dylan prove his age before he could go on stage for the first time. Pete Seeger eventually did become a mentor to Bob Dylan, though only a few years later. But again, despite the film, Dylan also never crashed Seeger's TV show or impressed the great black blues singer Jesse Moffett on the show with his own playing. That's because Jesse Moffett is a fictional character. What's going on here? We're looking at a film's complicated relationship to reality versus the need for effective drama. Lots of the time, reality is pretty mundane. A good example of what I'm talking about is shown by the depiction of Susie Rodolo, Dylan's first New York girlfriend. Susie Rodolo was a real person, was an early 1960s radical. Both her parents were members of the Communist Party, and it was she who took Dylan to anti-bomb demonstrations and urged Dylan into political songwriting. And that's where he made his first splash. She is the girl hugging a still waifish Dylan on the cover of the Breakthrough Freewheeling album. She appears in A Complete Unknown under the name Sylvie Russo, played by Elle Fanning. Dylan insisted on the name change to Sylvie Russo because, he said, the real Susie Rodolo was now a private person. That's pretty odd since Susie Rodolo has written her own memoir of her life with Bob, and an insightful book it is. I really recommend it. In the film, Sylvie Russo goes away to study in Italy for a few weeks. In reality, it was 6 months in the middle of 1962, and Dylan was shattered. But in the film, in those 6 weeks, the film then creates a love triangle going on with Dylan on the one hand and Sylvie versus Joan Baez on the other. This love triangle also never happened. The relationship with Joan started after Susie Rodolo and Bob were finished. This very traditional love triangle motif nevertheless drives part of the movie's narrative, and it's the most serious distortion in the film. It also makes Dylan look cruel, and yet Dylan approved this. And so, for instance, Sylvie didn't attend the 1965 Newport Folk Festival with Bob. Neither did Johnny Cash attend the Newport Folk Festival that year. There's a terrific performance by Boyd Holbrook, and it's intended to give Cash's approval to Dylan's authenticity. Cash is always approving in that deep bass voice of Dylan, but he wasn't actually there. On the other hand, they were friends. Again, there's the details and then there's the larger picture. In fact, by the time of the 65 Newport Folk Festival, Dylan had broken up with Joan Baez, too. He was living with his future wife, Sarah Lowndes, and she was pregnant with their son, Jacob. By that time, Susie Rodolo was largely the sad memory of a love Dylan had lost. So that never happened. That whole 1965 sequence with Sylvie never happened. But as usual, something like this did happen. Susie Rodolo did attend the July 1963 Newport Folk Festival, and it was there that Dylan and Baez first appeared on stage together, and Joan Baez couldn't resist introducing Dylan's song Don't Think Twice, It's All Right, by saying it's about, quote, a love affair that has lasted too long. Susie Rodolo was in that audience and was distraught. Their relationship ended a month later. I think we can say that at the end of A Complete Unknown, Dylan was making amends. Bob pulls up to Sylvie's apartment prior to Newport 65 and invites her to come with him on his big motorcycle. She reluctantly but delightedly agrees, hoping to resurrect their romance. It all turns out badly when she sees Bob with Joan Baez on stage. And seeing Dylan with Joan Baez, she faces reality and leaves, despite Bob's desperate pleas to Susie for forgiveness for how much he's hurt her. Dylan approved these climactic scenes in the film, where his own behavior is the fault line in their relationship. That took a lot of courage, and it seems to reflect a deeper psychic reality that he felt. But again, as a historian, I just love this. The real reality was much more mundane. Dylan drove to Newport in a car with friends, and he left Newport in a car with friends. There was no big motorcycle. In the film, though, when we see Dylan leave Newport in his big motorcycle, the point of the motorcycle in the film is drama, a doom-laden pointing towards Dylan's near-fatal motorcycle accident a year later. But it didn't happen. It's great to look at, but it didn't happen. And finally, one more point on historicity. Dylan's electric set at Newport was certainly controversial. Ellen Lomax, the folk song archivist, did get into a fistfight with Dylan's manager, as we see in the film. Pete Seeger did try to chop the electric circuit to the band with an axe. Some people remember a lot of booing. Dylan now claims he does. But other people say the booing wasn't much. And some witnesses say, yeah, there was some booing, but it was because Dylan and his electric band left the stage after doing only 3 songs. That is, they left the stage too soon. The situation was ambiguous then, and it's ambiguous in memory now. But no one shouted Judas, as happens in the movie. That's a very dramatic moment, but that happened in Manchester in Britain almost a year later. So it's dramatic license. Do these inaccuracies matter? Some strict Dylanologists say yes, but this is my last question. It's an issue similar to one that emerged 5 years ago with Aaron Sorkin's film, The Trial of the Chicago 7, back in 2020. I'm sure people saw this movie. Some 60s veterans were angered over the multiple inaccuracies in that film. Even the title was wrong, since originally there were 8 defendants, not 7, including the Black Panther leader Bobby Seale. His case was severed from the others, but only in the middle of the trial. and the conspiracy film's finale, which depicts Tom Hayden reading the names of the Americans who died in the Vietnam War. That never happened either. It was filmed in the service of heightening the drama. Changes were also done for simple aesthetic reasons, too. My wife, Judy, who you met last week, was the actual office manager for the conspiracy defendants, but she found herself in the film transformed into a tall, willowy blonde. Well, Judy's own position was that the film, wrong in many details, including her, got at least the basics of what occurred right. And if the film spread the story of the persecution of the Chicago 7th 8 to millions of younger people who didn't know the story, she was more than satisfied. And so Dylan is satisfied with the complete unknown. But then historical accuracy has never mattered to him. It's drama, the deeper truth, that does. Okay, so let's take a 5-minute break and then come back for questions. And again, if people have detailed questions they want to put on chat, that's fine. I will take a look. So, Jim, should we begin again?
Yes, I'm online and recordings started up again.
Okay. I went with yeah, it's been suggested that Dylan's inner life was dismal, separate from us, inward, possibly morose and alone. Was he an unhappy person? This was asked by Ramby to everyone. I, I have an opinion about that, but I bet other people do too. Does anybody want to take a shot at it?
I guess nobody's got their hand up.
Well, then I will. His kids say that he was a terrific father. And his relationship with his kids remains very close. And his relationship with Sarah Lowndes, even though they got divorced, has also remained amicable even after the divorce. What he said was, we were lousy as husband and wife, but great as parents. Of course, you can still be morose and be a good father. I think he is somebody who was internally guided, um, and certainly rebellious against any kind of external expectations from him, from others. Um, the clearest example of this was in December 1963. He was receiving an award from an elite civil rights institution, organization in New York. And the first thing that happened was that he arrived with a bunch of his, quote, scruffy friends. I guess these are proto hippies. And they wouldn't be allowed into the dining room where this was going on. And then when he spoke, he said, I look out at the audience and all I see is a lot of bald heads and gray hair. And, and uh, I think, you people, I mean, he's receiving an award from them. He says, you people are rich hypocrites. And you also don't want to look at the broader human tragedy of things. Yes, civil rights is very important, and they were very important to him, all have been all through his life. But you folks, uh, uh, you're just sitting there in your chairs, eating steak and having a good time. And, I even feel sympathy for Lee Harvey Oswald, he said. And this
Okay.
was a month after Kennedy had been shot.
Oh, goodness.
He says, Oswald is also a tragic figure. And it was that point that they said maybe he ought to leave. So uh, I think he also wrote a letter sort of apologizing for that. But I think this reflected his stubborn desire not to be controlled by anyone. And I do think that the obverse of his desire for freedom was a desire for isolation. Um, Although he's certainly capable of long-term friendships and relationships with the kids. His kids are good. Um, he also went through a whole series of religious uh, evolutions. In the late 70s and early 80s, he was a convinced fundamentalist Christian. And he said that's because in a moment of despair, so Rambi, there you go, at a moment of despair in my uh, hotel room, where while I was on tour, I was in despair, I suddenly had a vision of Jesus who comforted me. But then he went on from there to an Orthodox Judaism for a while. I don't think he saw, I think his vision is he didn't see much difference, uh, uh, although Jews and Christians do, but he didn't see much difference between Christianity and Judaism in moral issues. Clearly, he had dark nights of despair, and clearly he benefited from the fundamentalist Christian purity. Wrote 3 albums, at least one of which is good. Uh, and he married a black Christian woman, one of the back singers in on that album, and they have a child, and that child likes him. So, was Orson Welles fun to be around when? No. So I mean, when you say that, you guys, when you say he was, I guess it's Rambo. You're saying he was morose during the and bored during the concert you saw with him. I got to say, maybe you're lucky that he just didn't start attacking the audience as he did in December 1963. Um,
Benita, did you have a comment or question? I see you've unmuted.
your hand is
Just
up.
so, yeah, no. I was just going to say, I didn't know he was still touring.
Yes, he's touring this year.
Incredible.
Yeah, and you can say, especially if he looks bored a lot of the time, why is he touring? And I really think it's not money, although he's really, really, really rich. He
Yeah.
sold his um, archive to the University of Texas for I think it's about $500 million.
Hmm.
It's the experience of playing. Performance really matters to him. Weird as that might be, but especially since he's got arthritis and he can't play the guitar very much. His voice is a croak, and actually his piano playing, which he's been reduced to, isn't that great either. So you can say, why does he do it? Why do you think he does it, Bonita?
I don't know.
He's
He's driven,
unknown.
the way he's always been. He's driven.
He's driven.
Yeah.
and he doesn't know what's driving him. That's
Right.
what's amazing. He said he wasn't in control of what he was producing.
I have an idea about that though.
Okay,
That
go ahead, Mark.
I mean, while I don't know the details of his life, and you've given us a great deal today, the I think that people have a calling. Many people know the thing that motivates them in life, that makes them really connected to what they feel is the thing to do, that you have to do, and it makes you feel good to do it. You know, people laughingly told me that my calling is to set up chairs, and
Pick up cups. Pediatric cups.
but you know, there's a thing about that I've always done that kind of stuff. And when I retired, I mean, I was a librarian. When I retired, I always still do the same kind of thing, and
Mhm.
it's very deeply satisfying. And I think that's Dylan. That Dylan is a performer. He's a musician, and he makes music not to put in his back, you know, he wants to share it with people. And so that's why he does it. And if he's
You know,
feeling well enough to do it, God bless. Yeah.
Mark, he said that I'm a musician. You're quoting
Yeah.
him. That's what he said.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. And
That's
that's what it means to be a musician. You don't be a musician to make little ditties in your bedroom and not share them with people.
I think the desire of the hostility to control about being controlled is also important. Joan Baez did not want him to stop being a useful instrument for political progressivism.
Right.
She really didn't, and they broke up in part over that. He did not want to do that anymore. He was driven to something else. He was driven to beat poetry, and uh, doing rock and roll at Newport. Actually, that had already happened the previous day with another band, and that had been allowed. That was a giant finger to the folk song people who wanted him to stay, as he said, with finger pointing songs. And I think he liked doing those finger pointing songs, but then he didn't want to be straitjacketed into doing that.
Yeah. Say, Art, Shelley has asked a question.
Okay.
Shelley, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Oh, it's just that
It
I
won't come
uh,
back.
I
Yeah.
thought that it would be interesting to know if anybody has wait, what did I do? I'll put in this too. Wait a minute.
There
There
we
we go. I'm just curious whether anyone has seen him in concert since 1965 or whatever. Has anyone? And I mean, I'm just interested in where you saw him and what it seemed to you.
I
If
think, why don't you unmute? You can speak on mine. Yeah, Beverly had a comment. I believe.
Hi, I'm Jim's wife. Yeah, I saw him in the 90s, and he was in his Christian period. And most people in the audience for my age or older, this was down in Southern California, and he insisted on singing what he wanted and not what we wanted. And so it was a very, very boring concert, actually.
Is it worrying?
Pardon?
What kind of a concert was it? I
It
didn't.
was boring.
Boring.
You know, he wouldn't play any of his old songs. He wanted to just sing the Christian songs that he had developed. And so everyone was so disappointed in the crowd because they were there for the ones that he'd done in the 60s. So it was not, but he kind of said, "Fuck you" to us, is what he said. So he actually said that, "I'm going to do what I want, not what you want." So he didn't really care about the audience at that concert.
So how do you reconcile? I think that's very typical of him.
Right. Did he ever care
Did he
about
ever
what
know?
other people wanted? He wanted to do what he wanted to do.
Yeah. I've looked. Yes, you guys go.
Um, I'm the one who initiated this conversation because I went to a wonderful concert by him. We sat on the front row of an intimate little amphitheater. Actually, we were standing and had our arms around each other. The whole people we didn't even know, we had our arms around, and we were swaying back and forth in response to the performance. But his expression throughout was just stone. There was no connection, empathetic connection that we could detect from this man.
It
Wow.
was worse than that. He came out, he didn't look at the audience, he didn't say hello to us, he gave a stunning performance, he didn't look at us, he didn't say goodbye to us, and he left. It's as though we weren't even there.
It's a contradiction, isn't it? Because you're saying he was playing for himself,
That's right. That's right.
but
But it was a great performance.
and it was a great performance. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Marjorie has a question for you.
Marjorie,
Unmute. Yeah, well, I have two questions actually. One, everything about him that I've heard today and the movies from the movie, I can't connect to his being a good father. I mean, was his, is there, have you read about it, or are there biographies from his children?
yeah, his son Jacob has written about it a lot, and his son who's a macher in Hollywood who's written about it. And in both, looking at those two people, their parents have to be good in order for them to have been so successful as they have been. But you know what? That's a side that he keeps completely hidden.
Obviously, yeah.
It doesn't fit with.
It doesn't fit with. It's almost like he's on the spectrum in some way. You know, he just can't manage relationships with people. But maybe that's just with his audience.
Yeah, I mean, he's a complete unknown to us.
Yes.
Yes.
But not to his kids. And you know, I would have thought there'd be kids. You know, you could make a lot of money writing about my dad Bob, a terrible father, and nobody has.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's good. I'm glad for them.
But it's completely hidden from us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he does have long-term friendships, and those are completely hidden from us.
Right.
Bob is an example. Yeah. Barbara?
Yeah, my name is Barbara Gordon. I'm Mark's wife, but I think that this is a man who is completely driven internally.
Yeah.
And he really, it doesn't matter what other people think or what other people are doing. And I think that that's a gift, that he has in a way.
Yeah, I think that must have always been the case. And I think it must be disconcerting for most people to be around. I think he is internally driven. He does what he wants to do. He did a kind of theme song for an absolutely terrible movie called Gods and Generals, which was the follow-up to Gettysburg, and in which Stonewall Jackson is the hero. And,
Oh, wow.
he made a video in which he was sort of saying, well, both sides, it's tragic, something like that. And is it of all the things to do, especially given his commitment to civil rights, this was really strange to him to do. And Barbara, the answer was, it's what he wanted to do. It's what inspired him at the moment.
But in a way, it's very Buddhist in a way, that he really thinks that everybody is okay, and we ought to just pay attention to ourselves, and also what other people, doesn't matter.
You know, Barbara, I think that explains his connection to Allen Ginsberg. They were very, very close, and he came to view Ginsberg as a father figure, and Ginsberg actually appears in Rinaldo and Clara from 1976. The role he plays is the father in in that movie. So and so I am sure that Ginsberg influenced him, or was able to say, this is what you're feeling, and this is why you can feel good about it. This is how it works. So he was. So okay, now we have, Bob the Buddhist, Bob the Christian, uh,
Mhm.
Bob the Orthodox Jew, all of them, not simultaneously but sequentially.
Right.
So he, as you said, Barbara, I think he's driven internally, and we are the last people to know what those drives are.
Right, of course.
We can benefit from them because of the music, but we cannot know. Somebody was saying to me, it's like Mozart. Mozart was just producing this stuff, and it's not explainable.
Hmm.
It's not
Yeah,
explainable.
in a way, he's a true artist.
Yeah.
And he's internally driven, and it's what's going on in him that makes him go.
Yeah, I think Marjorie had a second question, but I want to come back to this just to say my own reaction to this. So I wrote a book. I think I must have told people, right? I wrote a book about the Weather Underground that was based on 30,000 pages of unreleased FBI documents.
Wow.
I don't remember writing the book. I was just a conduit of information from the National Archives to my computer. And I shaped it a little bit, but it was basically that, and that's a kind of experience that I think is a kind of spiritual experience. The book had to be done. I'm not saying it's a great book, but the information had to be out there, and I was the conduit. I was happy, lucky to be the conduit of it. But Marjorie, I think you had a second.
Oh, yeah. I sort of think I know the answer, but are you aware of academic classes in various universities of using his music and lyrics, especially since he won the Nobel Prize?
Uh, I'm sure there are many.
I'm guessing, yeah, but
Scholarly studies of Dylan, all of which he disdains.
yeah.
Art
by
of
major people, major cultural historians, and I'll give if you email me, I'll give you a list of those.
a
And
Harvard professor has every 4 years given a course on Bob Dylan.
really,
And his faculty friends teased him about it. He says, "What will be next, Sonny and Cher?"
Uh-oh, wow.
Guess what? Who has the last laugh?
yeah,
After Bob Dylan won the Nobel Prize for Literature, they realized why he was giving a course every 4 years at Harvard.
right, right. Well, that was the Nobel Prize was controversial, especially from people like that, who said literature is written text to be looked at, complicated to be looked at and contemplated in isolation and in silence. And so this was a really different kind of thing. But it's very strange. He refused to go to the Nobel ceremony. Nobody refuses to go to the Nobel ceremony. He asked Patti Smith to go instead, but then he wrote an essay to the Nobel Prize Committee, which is really worth reading, about the nature of art and the nature of performance. Uh, I think he just wasn't ready to do it at the time that he got it. But also, I mean, I hate to say it, maybe he's shy.
Could be.
What do we know about his parents?
Well, there's his parents. There's his elder brother who's a high school principal in a little town in Minnesota. How would you like to be the older brother? The father ran a hardware store in that little town in western Minnesota. He invited them to his 1963 Carnegie Hall concert, which is, I think, every Jewish kid's dream to be able to do that, especially, I think, because the parents did not want him to do music.
Yeah.
They wanted him to be a solid citizen. And
Goodness.
Hmm.
And you know, Highway 61 is only about 10 miles east of Hibbing, where he grew up, and so he went down Highway 60. It's what he did to get it to escape from this little town. And you can ask, what strength enabled him to escape from that? And you know, I keep bringing up my wife, but Judy left Toronto to come to San Francisco in 1967 on the basis of 1 2-day visit. She uplifted her life and uprooted her life just to do that. She said, well, Toronto felt to her black and white, and San Francisco was color. And people are able to do that, but I think it takes great strength. And I said to her, well, do you remember getting on the plane doing that? And she said, no, I don't. So he escaped from a middle class life that his brother did not escape from.
Oh,
And,
Richard has raised his hand for a question.
okay, true. I can't see everybody, so yeah, go ahead.
Richard, can you unmute? There he goes.
There were several comments about Dylan having played in a carnival. Was that a real thing or not?
No, that's total BS. No, he grew up a middle class life and had a bar mitzvah, and all of that stuff with the carnival stuff was, you know, seeking to have a romantic kind of Woody Guthrie-esque youth, which he didn't have until he left, and then he really did in Greenwich Village. So no, he's not dependable. He wasn't dependable. And I mean, there are wonderful interviews with him, and you don't know if he's being dependable in what he says there, because he's
Yeah.
he's an artist. I mean, we have lots of interviews with John Ford. Coming from my generation, Dylan is also a big fan of John Ford. We have lots of interviews, or some interviews, with John Ford, the director, and you can't believe a word he's saying. I mean, and he's doing it. It's the same, you know, giving the finger to the interviewer. I mean, it's something that they do. So it does raise, you know, what is an artist? And I would say, again, thinking about the film, the director had this vision, and he stuck with it for 4 years to get it done. And I think that you have to be driven to be able to do that. I mean, they start work, and then COVID happens, and that delays things for 2 years. And then they're about to start, and then the screenwriters strike happens, and the screenwriters strike goes on and on and on. He gets Cumberbatch to play Bob Seger, but then Cumberbatch leaves because of all the delays. It takes tremendous grit to be able to put together a project like that. And somebody's asking, did I know Sam Melville or Jane Alpert? I did not know Sam Melville and Jane Alpert. Judy knew Jane Alpert a bit, and Sam Melville was an early bomber who died at Attica.
Right.
And Jane Alpert wrote a very interesting book about her relationship, actually, to radical politics. The interesting thing about Jane Alpert, as you're talking about it, Jane Alpert was simultaneously involved in very, very radical, violent politics, and she was also the classics editor for Cambridge University Press in the United States. And I have a colleague who in 1970 was seriously interviewed by the FBI because her name appeared in a book, in a phone catalog that Jane Alpert had left behind. And she said, no, no, I write on female Roman poets. I said, oh yeah, sure. And she says that they weren't satisfied with just her, but the FBI then went to her neighbors who were immigrants from Eastern Europe and really terrified them.
Wow.
So that happened. Yeah.
Question.
Yes.
You haven't mentioned this other movie called Don't Look Back.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Oh, it's a terrific documentary. And it's in that documentary that Dylan is singing Subterranean Homesick Blues, and he's holding up the cue cards for the song. And in the background is Allen Ginsberg. And it's about his 1965 tour, spring 1965 tour in Britain. It's terrific movie, but in some ways it's appalling. You can see his treatment of Joan Baez, and they were at that point breaking up. He invited her along, she went, and he never invited her on stage, though originally she had been the big star, and getting invited on stage with her was one of his big breaks. And he was really terrible to her, really terrible to her.
Not surprising.
Yeah. And I mean, he's terrible to her. He says to her in the film, your music is like what you hear in a dentist's office.
Oh,
No. Terrible. Susan.
Different subject, going back to the Nobel Prize. How
Right.
did he happen to get Patti Smith to go? Wasn't she a songwriter herself?
She was honored to do it, and he agreed that she would do a hard rain's gonna fall, and in the middle of it, she's so it's a very anti-nuclear song. It's a wonderful, terrific song, and she stopped in the middle because she was so choked up with the words that he had written. Mm-hmm. So, and I would have thought she was a pretty tough person herself.
He wrote a wonderful memoir.
Patti Smith.
Yes.
Yeah. Tell me.
It's wonderful.
Tell us about it.
I read it several years ago when it first came out, and I can't tell you a thing about it except that I liked it. Okay. So that's all. I'll go back and look. I've forgotten now what there was about it that took me, but it's very engrossing.
But it's very interesting. And this is, again, he's a complete unknown to us. Why would he be talking to somebody like Patti Smith, who is 2 generations younger than him?
Right. That's what I was asking.
Yeah. There are things we don't know. Yeah. I mean, there are things we don't know about who he encourages. And
her book was a big seller. It was a popular book. Because I think I wouldn't have picked it up had it not come across my consciousness someplace.
I remember the book. So, I mean, the other thing in the last few minutes, I do want to come back to this issue of historicity. So you watch the film and it's an emotional experience. And that's what film is intended to do, is to elicit emotions in people.
Sure.
And yet Dylanologists, and I guess I'm a semi-Dylanologist, were appalled by what was being shown because it was so not what happened. And yet, again, Judy said, yeah, it's not what happened. So, but it's close enough to get the flavor of what happened to millions of people. And that's good enough for me. And as I said, she couldn't believe when we saw the Chicago 7. She says, "Oh, there I am. Oh, I didn't know I was a tall." But she also said, "Oh, that's okay." But there were people in our circle who were also rigidly opposed to the movie because it showed things that didn't happen. So, when you make a movie that's based on real events, people it falls between two stools, and people have to decide if this is good enough or not. Uh, I mean, I have to tell you, when I first saw Gladiator, it's the only thing real about Gladiator, the only thing authentic about Gladiator is that it once was a Roman Empire.
I wonder whether it's even possible to create a film about a historic event that's a fiction film
Yeah.
that isn't taking liberties like that. I can't even imagine that's a doable thing.
Well, I would also say even about a film that's nonfiction,
Yes, as this was. Yeah.
that is Monterey Pop and Berkeley in the 60s, they made what you see actually happen. Nevertheless, the editor has selected things
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Right.
left out other things to show.
Right. That's
So,
right. So, I mean, like if you were there at Monterey Pop, your experience might have been quite different, although it would have engaged certain of those things we saw. It's just, yeah, it can't be.
yeah, it's entertaining. I mean, we know it's sort of close, but it's entertaining. Again, the amazing thing about the Dylan Goes Electric and everybody's booing. Some people said, yes, that's what happened. Everybody was booing. Dylan himself says people were booing, but maybe he's confusing it with what happened in Manchester in Britain a year later. But other people say, no, there really wasn't a lot of booing. And then other people say, yeah, there was booing because he wasn't on long enough.
Mm.
Those are moments that are actually happening that people are experiencing that.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. No CCTV.
No, that's right. So, and so what do you do? I mean, this is, when I interviewed the veterans in the Weather Underground, what was amazing was what they agreed upon and what they disagreed had happened. So I was talking to Eleanor Stein, who's one of the Weather Bureau people, and I said to her, "How come you voted for up in Mendocino in May 1970 not to have lethal operations? That weather was not going to engage in killing?" And she says to me, "Well, my mother told me not to do that." And the complexity there, okay, so they're young. The mom told me not to kill anybody.
Yeah.
But it's more complicated than that because Eleanor Stein's mother, Annie Stein, was a Communist Party organizer. And she said the other part of that story was you can't engage in that kind of terrorism if the population isn't ready for it, and they're certainly not ready for it. All you're doing is killing people for nothing. So that's the other part of the story. So, but other people voted. I mean, Bill Ayers voted with well, Jeff Jones voted not to kill people because he had a Quaker background, and his father said, "Do not bring a gun."
Right.
You know, so these are all multiple experiences that people were having, that people were telling me about why they did things. So, and they were there. Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
Art, I have a question for you. You are an amazing historian. And it's because you're looking at truth as it happened, and you're also able to forgive fiction that reveals a different level of truth.
Yeah.
And I want to know, you have evolved over many years to where you are now. Were you this way when you began as a historian? And how have you changed? Your tolerance is amazing to me.
Well, yeah, my snappy answer is 14 acid trips.
Oh, okay. That's
That
okay.
gives me a broader view.
That'll do it.
I think you have to be forgiving of the artists. I mean, the artists are driven. They have vision. They produce these things. I think people who want to say no, it wasn't exactly like that, are narrow in terms of what should be done to educate people. What does education mean? I think, did I ever? Well, certainly I enjoy in both in doing the American stuff, but also doing the Roman stuff, which I do. I enjoy jousting with people and arguing about evidence and things like that. Where does the evidence fall? The example that is my own mentor doesn't want me to sit, doesn't think there's an analogy, but when Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 49 BC, his enemies did not expect him to come thundering down the Italian peninsula because it was winter. And instead, that's what he did. And that really struck me as Trump suddenly, as soon as he's in power, there's no waiting. It's the die is cast and off he goes. But my mentor, who's 90 and still publishing,
Wow.
yeah, published 3 books in his 80s.
Wow.
Yeah, he disagrees with me. But this is a matter of looking at evidence, which you can do. But, you know, art is different from that. And actually, history writing, after all, borrows narrative from fiction. You know, history doesn't occur in sentences. Events happen simultaneously, and people have different visions of them. And putting them together in a coherent narrative is already distorting because it's coherent. You know, so there's that involved in it too. I don't think I was ever narrow, though. You know, I do enjoy arguing, but
I'm enjoying your response, Art, because Lou is also a retired university professor of economics, which means he assumes many things. And he's also 91 and he still has all his marbles, which is pretty good.
That is terrific, Lou.
Listen, right now.
You're supposed to hear him rattle.
Can you hear him rattle?
Oh, I can hear them rattle. Yeah, I can hear all. Shelley wants to know where to find Dylan's essay. If you email me, Shelley, I'll get you the website.
Okay.
Yeah.
Probably I could do that research too, but that sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, but I do think what we've talked about today, which is the nature, the mysterious nature of art, not me,
Right.
I mean, artistic endeavor.
Yeah,
Well, you're fascinating also.
absolutely. Absolutely. This is great. Do you have any other courses?
Well, I think that James and I, for one, are talking a little bit about doing I'm doing a course on films from the Cold War. So think about that if people want to do
Yeah,
that.
definitely.
And yes, yes.
And
Okay.
we would start with On the Beach.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next Monday.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I-
Bye.